This is truly a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Sean Moffitt. I am coming into this webcast from Canada. I also have my co-host Andrea coming in from Silicon Valley. And we are very proud to be going on our next month of our movement and book tour to India and South Asia. So we're about to get started. It's 11 o'clock on my hour. It might be some different time on your hour. And definitely welcome to South Asia. I tried to find as many languages as I could. I might have missed one or two. Certainly some of the dialects I would have missed, but we always appreciate having connection and discussion with people from around the world. And on this one, it's quite an intriguing one, Andrea. I know I've spent some time in India myself, and I'm fascinated with both the culture, but also the rising tide of business in India as well. What's your experience been like?
Yeah, so I used to work in Bangalore, and I remember going there the first time when I was working with a healthcare startup and realizing how many people there were and how amazing the mix of cultures was. And it was super, super exciting. And then I came back to Silicon Valley feeling like we were a little perhaps slow and sluggish and lacking in young people. So been really excited to see all the geopolitical movement in South Asia and India.
Yeah, it's always interesting because when you say South Asia, a lot of times it never gets broken out. It's like the colossus of South Asia, which includes Southeast Asia. And so we thought on today's discussion, we would focus specifically on India and the 7 or 8 other countries of South Asia today. So welcome everybody. And in terms of our ongoing mission at Futureproofing Next, it's pretty simple. We could try to complicate it, and we'll try to over the next hour, but really our mission is to help our clients, our readers, our audiences, in something we're about to announce to you today, certainly our trainees, to build better, bigger, bolder, and simpler futures. Because at the end of the day, we think that's what business people want out of their innovation and transformation and change functions. And Andrea, I know we've got a couple of different things we're launching. Do you want to give a tease on any of that, or should we wait here?
Well, I think it's exciting because we're launching a not a book. We kept calling our book a not a book because we thought people need more than a book. They need something to do. They need toolkits. So then after we did the not a book, then we realized that people needed not a course, because what people didn't need was a boring group of people giving lectures on video, which is what a lot of online education had become. So we decided to do Futureproofing You, which is hands-on. It starts March the 25th and 26th. And we're super excited because it's hybrid and you get a whole bunch of Sean, a whole bunch of Andrea, and a whole bunch of Chen Yang Shu. So yeah, we're launching that, and we would love to have that be part of the conversation today.
Certainly the popularity has been such on this first cohort, we've already started to open up the conversation about having different cohorts from around the world coming in at different times. So that may be of something of interest here. Once again, my name's Sean Moffitt. I've spent a bit of time in corporate land to start off my career. I was a chief marketing officer and strategy officer in a number of different places. And over the last 15 years, I've built almost every 3 years focused on a different specialty. So now I feel like I can legitimately say I am a 6-tool corporate innovation champion. That's a tough mouth to say. And Andrea, explain your cross-industry revenue accelerator.
Yeah, well, I wrote a book about the same time that you wrote your book, Wikibrand, Sean. I wrote Find Your Next, and went down the path of trying to figure out what was keeping corporate strategy at the time from moving across the finish line. And so I remember going to a really large healthcare company and saying, okay, you just won the Baldrige Award, which is an excellence in quality award. And I said, okay, which other healthcare organizations did you benchmark against? Because I knew all about benchmarking. And they said, healthcare companies. We didn't benchmark against healthcare companies. That would have been too sluggish. We benchmarked against Disney because they really understood the customer experience and we needed to understand the patient experience. So that was my big aha. That was about 10 years ago. And ever since then, I've been interested in accelerating business growth through cross-industry insights and business model generation insights.
Wonderful. No, it's benchmarking is always an interesting one. Depending if you benchmark against the turtle, you'll always appear fast, won't you? So,
Sean, how can you be so funny when it's almost midnight?
no, true. And as an Irish Canadian who used to be the head of marketing for Guinness, yeah, at some point in time, right after this webcast, I'll probably be celebrating here. So,
yeah,
and
things
I'll
turn
just
into green beer everywhere in your world now.
as we get into the official proceedings, I'm going to remind all of the people in our background just to make sure that we're recording this one, so we make sure that we get a clean version. But we want to thank our community, the people that have come in live today, and also the people that are going to be joining us through watching this on YouTube or our podcast or any of the different channels we get this out. A very humble thanks. And we do have concentric circles of champions. We had our first champions event last month, which went very well. We have a network of people that we collaborate with and a community of people that kind of stop on by and read our stuff and kind of chime in when they feel necessary. So thank you. So today I thought we'd talk about three things. One, I conceive of what we're doing here, Andrea, as a movement for a future beyond innovation. There's been many, many good schools of innovation before us. We think we've got a really good one for this decade. And so we're not unabashed to actually say that. We'd love to get a South Asian perspective on innovation, and we are launching a whole bunch of different things globally, and we'd love to get people that are listening to potentially participate with us. And I thought we'd have a level setter too, because we actually, unfortunately, we went online the other day and looked for any vice presidents or heads of Futureproofing, and regrettably, there was not a large number. So our mission is, over the next 5 years, to make sure that the titles that people wear when they go to work and do innovation, change, and transformation are increasingly going to be those of heads of Futureproofing, chief Futureproofing officer, because we think it is a broader perspective on innovation. It is the future beyond innovation. And we think it includes a lot of the different dynamics, some of which we're going to talk about in today's webcast, that are much more in tune for the 2020s versus something that might have been considered innovation 30 years ago. This is a new slide in our repertoire. Andrea, any thoughts on Futureproofing at its essence?
Yeah, well, we didn't want to be accused of being unappreciative of the concept of innovation, but it's really interesting when you look at it that innovation is almost passé, shall we say. Everybody knows how to do elements of innovation. And people also talk about these organizations that have to innovate and execute at the same time. So there's a lot of thinking in twos. So, can you do the operations? Can you do the looking ahead? But what we realized when looking at the speed of today's market and when listening to people talk about how important new purpose is, especially post-COVID, but the sense that there's another set of metrics that's really important, that it's not enough to just execute and explore. You also need a third dimension, which is what we call the third element of the Futureproofing, which is to be able to really see early signs of trends that are going to be significant. And so we view it as three. It's not ambidextrous, it's a multidextrous organization. And that's what we think is going to be the only way to thrive in the next world of Futureproofing.
It's so true. I mean, sometimes you convince yourself of your own argument, Andrew. I remember we did a Futureproofing forum about a month and a half ago, and we analyzed the top 10 innovation approaches that people have used for the last 50 years. And with the exception of one of them, most of them forget about the future entirely. It's either too complicated to predict or too chaotic to worry about. And so if we've seen anything over the last year, ignore the future at your own peril, because you may not be able to predict it, but you certainly need to react to it, given what we've seen during COVID. And so we have a number of different launches. We have a book that is imminent. There are sleep lines on my face that suggest that this one is coming out very shortly. We have an awards program, which truly we want to get out to the world. This should not be just New York and San Francisco and maybe Toronto and London deciding who are the best companies in the world. We'd like to get out to the full world. We're launching that later this month. And Andrew, I leave the most precious and perhaps the one that's maybe taking up a lot of our time to you. Why don't you introduce us and our audience to our executive training course?
Futureproofing You is our newest baby, and we love it the best, partly because everyone was begging us for it. So it's really great when people are like, can't you teach us how to do this? There are a couple of things about it. I'll say three. Number one is, as I said earlier, Sean and Andrea and Shenyang Xu, the three of us are learned that the most important thing for teams today in figuring out how to get ahead of the future and how to really innovate in this new way is to work with Sean and Andrea and Shenyang. We are really dedicated to not just putting videos on the web and calling that education, but working with what we call a cohort. And we're excited that we have people from the insurance industry and fintech. We have a team from mobility, and that's global. We have European banking and investment banking group. We have people basically from all walks of life, consumer goods, manufacturing, all going to be in the same cohort. So there's first part is everybody gets to learn from each other. And when we said earlier, cross industry matters, in the room together, we're going to have people bouncing ideas from different perspectives, challenging each other. What can healthcare learn from fintech? What can fintech learn from consumer goods? What consumer goods learn from logistics? There are all these mix-ups that have to happen. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that it's basically 4 sessions that are 4 or 5 hours long, where you get to roll up your sleeves and do things. So you don't have to read the book. And in less time than it would take you to read the book, we're going to walk you through everything. But the other part of it that's really important to us is that it's about your work. So you come to the experience with something from your world, something you're really trying to tackle. And what I said is, this is the gift of focus. Boy, if I could get 16 hours to focus on what I'm trying to make progress in 2021, what a gift that is. So we're excited. It's what we wished we had had when we were trying to learn business strategy, the future, and innovation. And it's also going to be lots of fun, lots of hands-on activities. Starts
Excellent.
March the 26th. So, and it's not too late. So if you have a team, if you want to do it yourselves, we would love for you to join us.
I guess the only it's not a total complication, depending on the time frame or your comfort level with different times. Our courses happen on Friday, but there's a bit of a time difference that we'd have to just account for, but that doesn't negate anybody joining, and thus the reason for interest in doing some global cohorts around the world. We also are doing something called salons. We had our first ambassadors event last month. Really smart people committed to wanting to collaborate with us much more deeply than just your garden average variety person. And we're also getting a few foresight ventures rolled out, one of which we'll peek into today. And so we've been using this line for the last 6 months, and it's not to insult any of the great innovation schools that came before us. Each of them had, I always used to say at Procter & Gamble, where I used to work, you were standing on the shoulders of others here, giants. And some of these have very good merits, even still. But I think 2 realities. One, they were built for an earlier time and were driven by a different environment. And 2, they weren't ever developed with a notion to be a full end-to-end solution that provided all of your innovation needs. We're ambitious enough to certainly make sure that we accommodate for the 2020s, but also we look at both front, middle, and back end innovation. Any additional thoughts here, Andrea?
No, I'm just excited that we're able to take the best of lots of things from the past. But since we've been at this for, 10 years working in our these kind of independently, and then for about 5 years trying to apply these principles to teams, we realized what really worked from each one. But then we also brought a lot of, I think, original thinking and a lot of analytics to figuring out, what is it that doesn't work anymore about SWOT analysis? Where's the limitation? Why is Six Sigma not the only way to look at strategy anymore? Design thinking, it's really great and wonderful for what it is, but it's really unfair to expect design thinking to bring commercialization across the finish line. That's not necessarily its intent. So what we realize is today's needs are asking for, as we said earlier, speed, and also the ability to not just come up with ideas, which was the problem about 10 years ago with open innovation. I mean, there just weren't enough ideas going around in 10 or 15 years ago, But now we've got lots of ideas. And the question is, where do you place your bets? And how do you accelerate these ideas? And we say, so you could take it to the bank, really get the returns. And I also want to insert that, Siva, hi, how are you? Some people are starting to weigh in on the chat. We love to actually meet you. We are trying to make friends, and because of COVID, can't get on as many planes. So we'll be trying to keep up with the chat as well. So please let us hear where you're from and how you heard about us. And Siva says health and education tech spaces, and covering India, Southeast Asia, and Australia, Asia. So based in India. So welcome. And please, we'd love to have everybody type into the chat. Welcome.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Certainly. Well, as I said, some of my best times I've ever spent in India, both from a business standpoint and from just an enjoying a culture that wasn't unfamiliar to me, but at the same time very exotic and strange to my Canadian sensibility at another time as well. So now, it's not all about us. We want to kind of embrace the notion that some of the principles that we pulled together in Futureproofing have global application. And so as we looked at South Asia, two really interesting things I caught. Andrea, I'll get your reaction to it. Seems like everybody got an economic blow by COVID, and South Asia wasn't an exception. Their economies contracted by about 8% last year. But if you look at the out years, you're looking at 4.5% and 4.6% growth. So essentially, by the time 2022 is over, India and South Asia will have whatever they lost during COVID will certainly be surpassing that, and hopefully be on a better growth plane. And then the other thing is India just cracked the top 50 nations in the Global Innovation Index, which might not seem like big news, but when you consider that India was sitting on that index 3 years ago at around 67, you start to realize, this is one of the fastest movers on the list. And I'm candidly shocked that it's only at 48. I would have thought India would have ranked higher given some of the companies that I know out of India. So any reactions to those two thoughts, Andrea?
No, actually, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I also think, when I was saying earlier about the youth culture and the ability to, we do a lot in AI and in ethical data, and so much innovation has been coming out in terms of engineering and AI for years and years, that it was just a matter of time until some of those applications would take hold and become global leaders as well. So we're looking to the whole region for inspiration, to be quite honest.
The other thing I also noticed was just really outsized for some of its rankings on this list, enormously active in patents as well. India is by far and away, versus any of the ratings that we see here, punching well above its rate in terms of generating patents. So it'll be interesting as we pivot toward the future. And so what's the biggest challenge for Indians and South Asian innovation? And certainly if you're on the chat, definitely give us your thoughts in terms of what you believe the biggest challenge is. I know in a lot of different regions, it's capital. I know COVID has caused us to reappraise a lot of the different things that we're thinking about. Any thoughts in terms of, as we think about this region, Andrea, on what the biggest opportunities might be?
Well, you know that you're going to keep hearing me talk about geopolitical forces, because I keep looking at these tectonic plates. Who's going to partner with China, who's not going to partner with China, how are the alliances with a huge population in South Asia and India going to line up? We talk a lot about trust, and I think that the region, the South Asia and India, are really poised to make some really great alliances in the next 2 years. And we just see people lining up with partnerships and collaborations and co-creation like crazy. And that, to me, is a challenge and an opportunity, to be quite honest.
I also see it from an environmental standpoint too, Andrew. If I was to throw a couple more cents in, just you've got a massive population here that is growing, and there's a burgeoning middle class that's happening, whether it's required or whether it's prudent from an innovation standpoint. That I've certainly read up on a lot of different Indian entrepreneurs with some help from world governments actually looking at different innovation ventures. So I would imagine that will be a continuing part of this part of the world as well. So why this book? We've got a book, 12 Simple Reasons Why This Book. It's nice and colorful, first of all. We've written it with this standpoint of having one page be very design friendly and hopefully visually bring off a concept, and one page be an explanation of what you've just read. And so, and we're all about the future beyond innovation. We are both a manifesto, field guide, playbook, and resource bank all in one. If you jump onto our website and look at futureproofingnext.com, 21 Reasons Why, you'll get a sense of just the types of arguments that we're putting forth in our book. And I think, not only is it right for this decade, but along comes COVID and the pandemic, and you realize, wow, I think if we had written it a different way, perhaps we might be rewriting it. But because we had written it with the future in mind, when you look at the pace, when you look at demanding customers, when you look at cultural expectations, and maybe more than just the bottom line, and looking outside your industry for solutions, all of which have accelerated under the last 12 to 15 months of being in a pandemic. I don't know if you have any retrospective thoughts here, Andrea, as you look at 15 months later.
For me, especially since my background in India specifically was with a healthcare startup company. And it was really interesting because there's a group in Stanford University that specializes in frugal innovation. And this was one of the leaders from that graduate program. I was on the board of the company, and it was interesting, female CEO, and we moved the company from Silicon Valley to India, which was really an interesting reversal of what people expected. And so when we did a lot of the field work in India, it was really clear that healthcare and diversity and different cultures, and we went all over the region doing field work to try to figure out how to take a frugal innovation that was a baby incubator and bring it to the villages, to the cities, and the distribution, the government, the regulatory environment. It was really amazing how complicated it was to bring innovations in healthcare to a very diverse continent. So to me, that's just multiplied with COVID, right? The haves and the have-nots, the disparate approaches to prevention, public health. I mean, these are the topics that are going to be, we believe, front and center in every place in the world. And India, I think, has so much diversity that it can teach the world so many lessons.
I agree. We've also looked at our book from 30 different vantage points. Oftentimes people think, well, design thinking, that's what innovation is. It's about 1/30 of what innovation is. And so we've looked at 6 different areas and about 30 different schools. And so certainly one of our arguments is that future proofing takes in all of the different levers at a change agent and chief executives kind of domain, and not just this small little sliver of what we've customarily known as traditional innovation. And so, as you can see here, a lot of different ones that, depending on which part of the C-suite, you may have a sliver of it. We've tried to bring all elements of that C-suite together into one argument. And then from a scope standpoint, we have this, we've fallen in love with our scopes. We have 6 different scopes. We think innovation is a generalist art, and there is a stethoscope for talent and culture. There's a microscope for company and strategy, and they're profiled in our chapter inside now. And in our integrated forces chapter, we have a gyroscope, which is all about technology, a kaleidoscope, which is the customer and marketplace, a periscope, which is all about looking cross industry and innovation, and a telescope, which, as we've talked about earlier, is about looking ahead at futures and trends. Do you have a favorite scope, Andrea?
I do. You know which one I'm going to pick.
I've never asked you this question, so I think I caught you by surprise.
No, I really like the telescope, intelligence and skills. It's funny because we were just talking in the chat. Some of us are sidebarring in the chat. And, it used to be that people thought of people like us like as futurists, but we don't try to predict the future. I mean, this is what I love is we feel like we have what we call suggestive analytics, not predictive analytics. And Sean is certainly one well-trained in prediction, but I hope I've gotten him to come around to the fact that, if you can see early signs of emerging trends and have this a telescope that perceives these early signs, intelligence, and get people involved, skills in really being able to do something about it. They call it adaptive intelligence, and we really love that. So to me, the telescope intelligence and skills is my favorite, because it's where probably Sean and I had the most maybe formal training in terms of looking at the future. And I've changed my opinion about what we need to do to really move our teams forward, which is not try to predict perfectly, with mathematical accuracy, which, oh, by the way, is never quite right. Not have these 5-year plans that, oh, by the way, by the time you get there, they're changed anyway. But to really be resilient and to be able to feel like, okay, something's changed, just like with COVID, and now we need to, to respond. And I just want to mention that it says in India, contextual intelligence, even hyper local, is critical. And just so you know, Sean wrote this really great article on paradoxes. And, the notion, one of the paradoxes is COVID brought us so incredibly global. Here we are in India, but we're not really there, but also hyper local. I mean, I live in Oakland, California, and I never even knew the person selling fruit at my corner until COVID, because it was kind of a quick in and quick out. Now, my local, hyper local is extremely important.
The world is a paradox, and so is our life and innovation. I think that's well said, Andrea. That's the first time we ever covered that. We might have to turn that into a post or something. We also have plenty of new frameworks, about 20 different new frameworks that we're throwing out there to the world to consume. We love getting early reaction. This was one that we posted maybe a few months ago on LinkedIn as a teaser, and it got a lot of really good traction. We find a lot of innovation models are either two-sided models or 2x2 matrix models. Some of them, Doblin, I'll give Doblin some credit. They had a 10 type of typology of innovation that I thought was really, really good, and they produced it a decade ago. And so we've now taken that work and taken it one step further and said, look, there's a lot more nuance to this innovation thing than people give it credit for. We think there's 5 different levels and 6 different layers to different types of innovation. And if you don't look at any one of these 6 different areas, you will be losing out on opportunity right, left, and center. And so this is also one of our new frameworks and templates. We are quite diligent in terms of looking at future readiness, and we do it from a number of different standpoints, both the process, the team, how your parent organization operates, your pedigree of success, and even some multiplier effects based on which type of situation you end up being in. So at the end of the day, you can actually look at your kind of innovation and transformation function and say, are we performing well, and how can we improve a certain area or another? Andrea, we have 18 canvases. We have 36 tools. It's almost like an embarrassment of riches. I know even in our training course that we've looked at, it may be that we get 30 seconds of one of these in a training course because we just have a lot of good stuff. And I don't think it's our aim for people to go through 54 tools and execute all of them in their company, but it's nice to have them if you need them, isn't it?
The most important thing, we think, is that the question that you ask and the framework that you use to think about potential actually ends up defining where you go. So for instance, if you're given a business model canvas, which if people know what that is, a lot of people know that, you're going to end up with an experiment and probably a startup mindset. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only tool you have, it's kind of the one size fits all approach. It's going to limit you when it comes to things like the following. What does this project look like within the context of other options for funding within a large company or even a mid-sized company? You have 5 different things that all got fabulous grades in the hackathon, but that doesn't mean that those are all the right directions for your company to go next. So we think that what's cool about our tools, well, we think everything's cool about them, but mostly that they help you, if you pick the right one, it accelerates your progress because you're focusing on the right question right? So instead of saying, oh, how might I come up with 50 new ideas, which is maybe one question, it might be, which of the potential opportunities ahead of us is where we should place our focus? And that's a different set of questions and a different framework. So we love the fact that it's like measured twice, cut once. If you define a tool first and then fill it in, figuring out which tool to use is part of it. So that's what Sean and Chen Yang and I help you with in the course, obviously, is figuring out how to match the tool to the circumstance. And we're excited because these are all the tools we wish we had had when we were running early stage initiatives within companies.
Car's almost like it's like a chassis, isn't it? Like, and we bling it out very differently depending on who you are. So yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but certainly, it's a well driving car. The bones are great, but if you want to have a great stereo and you don't care so much about the rug in your car, we've probably got to set an array of tools for you within our book. We've also looked at different industries and different change functions. You'll look at some of these colorful, some people like landscape models, other people go, I'm confused, but I think there's an important component of what we've done here, that we've gone broad and we looked at everything before we've defined what we think is important. And so we do have quite a few of these at our disposal. And Andrea, I know you worked diligently in terms of some of the case studies that you can be found in our training course and book. You want to speak to this?
Well, the typical, and there's nothing wrong with Harvard Business School, by the way, and their case study approach, but sometimes they tend to be a bit academic. And so there might be a lot of rigor and a lot of data behind it. But in terms of the flexibility to apply it directly to what's ailing you today, sometimes you have to dig in a little bit deep. We are really lucky, and it's hard to really prove this, but we think that the 13,000 teams of data and the 200 plus companies that Sean and I have worked with, lots and lots of them, have given us these universals that are really, really helpful in any time you're stuck. We call them boulders. You have this big boulder or this big rock in front of you. We feel like we've got a way to move that out of the way or push it aside or work through it because of companies like Siemens and Unilever and GM and Moen. There's so many aspects to each of these rich experiences we've had. They're not just academic case studies. They're actually experiences that Chen Yang and Sean and I have had in helping teams get real and get beyond these boulders.
And we've also, and we've looked, trust me, we've read everything. We've looked around the world and we've said, what are some gaps in coverage here that would be really helpful for any practitioners that are out there, wherever you are in the world? And certainly a number of them about scaling corporate innovation. Very little has been written about that. Business models of the future, with the rare exception of 2 or 3 different companies, very little written about that. How do you become a future proofer, and what are those leadership skills of the future? Pretty barren. Not a lot of work has been done in terms of defining that set of change skills for the future. And finally, we think our future readiness stuff is truly pioneering as well. We think people have rated certain things before, but haven't brought all things under the same roof. And so we're quite happy about what we've pulled together here. We do, once it's a number, there's some tangibility here. So across all these different numbers, and I want to highlight one here. It may appear a little bit like it needs explanation. We've got 88 lines of inquiry. We have these trigger cards. We'll eventually turn them into real playing cards. But Andrea, you want to speak to the 88?
Well, there's 88 keys on a piano, and there are 4 core elements: see, learn, decide, commit. So we treat them like 4 let's see, like a heart, a diamond, a club, and a spade. So see, learn, decide, commit. Each one has 11. So if we do the math, 11 times 4.
Well, each has 22.
2.
You're going to do the math and you're going to fall short, right? Because
no, times 2.
Correct.
No, 4 times 11 times 4 times 2. So we end up with 88 by taking 2 from C, two from learn, two from decide, and two from commit. And it's, we have fun with it because it's challenging to try to come up with really specific triggers where you can say, okay, I've got this problem. And not that we're stereotyping problems, but they do fall into categories, right? It's either a problem around we don't really understand what's on the horizon. We don't know where to, tap into our core capacities as an organization. We really keep saying blockchain or machine learning, but we don't know what it is. So anyway, whatever it is that people come up with, we like to guide you through some news you can use, something that somebody else has experienced in a similar category, to start as a point of departure for you to explore a little deeper and get ahead of those boulders.
They're really great questions. And the only pause I'm having now is when you struggled so much to get to the club. I was going to invite you to my poker gathering at the end of the month, Andrea, but I'm questioning whether that might be the right idea. I'm not too sure. So
I couldn't remember the fourth suit. Yeah, there you go.
It's late in our geography, so I'm giving you an out on that. There is the story of the three bears and Goldilocks. I know it's very common in a North American context. I'm not too sure how much airplay it has in India. Maybe somebody on the chat can actually say yes. It has played just as well in India, but it's a story of a girl who comes back home and the bear's been in, has had some of the porridge in bed, and oh, it's too warm and that's too cold, and this one's just right. And so we think from an innovation and change standpoint, we've painted something here that's just right, not too far on one side or the other. We complete the full range here. We view futurists with some level of envy. They get away with doing some really cool stuff, but no one's there to execute what you're working on 25 years out, and its accuracy is probably going to be quite wrong if you can't pivot along the way. And so there's just various things that have bothered us over time that we've said, look, if we were to build something for clients again, how would we build it? And so this is what we've done. And the other thing is, just from a proof standpoint, we've had many different countries we worked in. We've worked the tools that are included here with 200 different clients. We've learned from a whack load of different organizations, and we have about 25 studies that we've looked at and 22 different factors that drive, in our opinion, a success. So you don't have to imitate the startup. You don't have to create a center of excellence that all they do is produce concept cars but never produce something for the marketplace. You can actually do what works, which is, I think, what we've defined here. And so we have a book, it's coming out, and my hope is it's going to be available broadly everywhere. From an India standpoint, I'm going to have to check that in terms of just whether that's immediate or not, but I'm sure if you're on Amazon, you're probably nearly everywhere in the world. So, how does South Asian business get more innovative? We had a survey earlier where we talked about how things look like post-COVID. I'd be curious, just if people are listening in on the chat, please put your thoughts in terms of what you believe might be the breakthrough need for India. And it could be regulatory, it could be infrastructural, could be investment, could be the way we lead, and maybe having a different mindset and culture around how to do innovation. I know we recently did some in South America, where one of the big things in South America was cultural, right? It's a very, hierarchical culture. And so how does somebody that comes in as a 27-year-old, has all these great ideas and is met with 8 lines of different levels between you and the CEO, how do they work in that atmosphere? So I'll be curious what people have to say here. And so our approach, Andrea, we have different lexicon here. Do you want to just top line, what does see, learn, decide, commit mean? Because this is really our laws, right? Our code.
It's really hard to get simple. And after looking at all of the patterns, Sean and I love to pattern recognize, and all of the patterns, and it seems so complicated, but it reminds me when I was getting my master's in business, there were all these equations in finance, and I was just going crazy. And I asked one of my study mates, God, how are we going to learn all these finance equations? He said, no, there's actually only 4 of them. They're just different versions of the same 4 equations. And suddenly the patterns became clear. Sean and I had the same revelation that everything that was holding people back from getting innovation across the finish line had to do with seeing differently. We have, for instance, anchoring bias. We see what we want to see, and we don't even realize we don't know what we're looking at in new ways. Learning, as I said earlier, we realize that a lot of things in technology really, or healthcare or digital health or whatever, you need to really understand, say it's a medical field. We saw that there are people in the medical industry in the group today. You have to understand what the analog way is of diagnosing a disease before you can create digital health. So you have to learn some things and be expert in some areas. So how can adults who are really good at one job learn what we need to be able to migrate into something that's critical for the future? Deciding didn't used to be a problem. I mean, it's incredible. You made a decision at the beginning of your 5-year plan, and that was kind of all you had to decide. The rest was called execute. But now, with so much innovation and so much on the horizon, you have to really make sure that you're aligning people to be all walking in the same direction, or you'll end up with either one, not getting where you need to get to because everyone's going in a different way, or B, placing a little bit of a bet in multiple places so that you really haven't gotten to take full advantage of anything. So after watching hackathon after hackathon within companies and realizing that, lots of people were winning, but lots of people weren't scaling, we realized that deciding, coming clean with the team and saying, hey, are we going to go into miniaturization, or are we not going to go into miniaturization? Are we going to pursue a mobile solution, or are we not going to pursue a mobile solution? That decision turns out to be really important. And then commit is something that Sean and I, because I never used to give it a lot of love. Commit seemed obvious to people like Sean and Andrea because we're really rational. We feel like if the facts don't speak for themselves, then you're not looking carefully enough, right? It should be all data driven. But it turns out that the entrepreneurial spirit, which, love it or not love it, the good news about it is that people feel a sense of urgency and a sense of buy-in, and we call it commitment. So what we've learned is when a leadership team, no matter where they are in the organization, has a commitment narrative, they can talk about their why. And it was really obvious when all of a sudden, for instance, company after company responded to COVID by thinking, we must do this. We are committed. We can't have our people unsafe. They figured out future of work in 3 weeks. Commit really means a lot. So we think that see, learn, decide, commit are the 4 key elements that every leader needs to master to bring innovation to the bank.
I'm going to put you on the spot again here, Andrea. I've never asked you this question, but we've said see, learn, decide, commit so many times in the last year. Are we ever going to turn this into SLDC as an even further shorthand, or is it always going to be see, learn, decide, commit?
So I think when you and I develop our musical of, because we've done not a book, now we're doing not a course. So next it'll be not a musical. But so when we do the stage version of this, there will have to be a lyric called SLDC.
All right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking that, but thank you for putting me on the spot. I appreciate that.
I like which direction you took it in. So, so this puts a little bit more meat on the bone. I think Andrew was getting to the 88 trigger cards because each one of these steps has 2 individual steps, and they oftentimes are, something completely different over here, whether it's inside now being inside and integrated forces being outside in, whether it's a little bit of converge and diverge in a couple of different areas, and whether it's actually doing the work of launching stuff, and then in the last step, commit, the actual how do you sustain it and scale it over time. I think you see a good range of different things, and so we've seen this over and over, and it was a revelation to us when we collided on this as the solution. And obviously we're not going to go through all of this, but it's certainly got an operating system and some horsepower behind it. We have a range of different tools and canvases that we discussed earlier that fit in each one of these steps. And so we're very curious. Certainly we'll poll people on the back end when we send all of our materials out to people in terms of just where do we think the biggest challenges are when you are innovating inside your companies? Is it early on? Is it later on, or somewhere in between? And so we'll do this really quickly. We think we're creating a movement here. We've got about 12 things listed here, but we wanted to at least profile 7 of them that certainly are factoring prominently in our lives. We are doing these global book tours. We have done about 6 regions so far. The next one is the Middle East on April 13th. So if you know people in the Middle East, we're very interested in connecting with them. And later in the year, Futureproofing Next toward the fall months will be catering to different functional areas. So if you're in a CFO role, we'll have a futureproofing session. If you're in a CHR role, like a human resources role, we'll maybe do one for you as well. And here we go. This is where it is, and this is what I just explained. Training course, we've mentioned it again and again. We're so excited about some of the corporate teams that have signed up. Really high caliber people that have signed up in the course, and they're going to learn from each other, not just us, which is the really cool part about this. We do our monthly webcasts, and certainly we've got an awards program that's coming up. We also have a range of different topics. It feels like each month the topic changes and the format changes. And as mentioned, March 30th, we'll be doing a Futureproofing Awards program where we're going to mine the world out there to see who is doing this the best. We got a number of different foresight ventures, 5 of which we've got going on this year. We've already launched at least the ranking of our emerging 30 technologies, but as you see, we have a number of different things that are very relevant for people nowadays. Andrea, we've got a group of ambassadors around the world, and this might be particularly interesting for people in South Asia. Just, we are building a global squadron of people that really like what we do and want to get more heavily involved. Any additionals on that?
Oh, there's some really interesting chat about this that I'm in the midst of. Hang on. It talks about, hold on. So it turns out that it's about people. So one of the things that we were talking about is, how can we change our companies if we haven't changed ourselves? And Sean and I used to say, oh, we're not about people. We're not about leadership. We're about process. We're about frameworks. We're about strategy. We're about revenues, and we're about purpose for companies. And then one day we were talking, and it's like, you know what? It really starts with people. And in a sense, it's a mindset shift. And we've seen this everywhere. We were working with a company in Japan a couple of weeks ago, and they said, by the way, where do these new ideas come from? And you know where they come from? They come from what Amy Edmondson calls psychological safety, from an environment where leaders encourage other leaders to think differently. They don't get punished. And there's a mindset of openness to seeing the world in new ways, to being open-minded around co-creation. So this is what we're building. We're hoping that we're doing it slowly. The reason that we made the trip to, well, it's not a trip, but it was going to be a trip to India and South Asia, is that we really care about change agents, innovators, futurists, business leaders, venture technologists, ecosystem builders, and fellow thought leaders. And we want to learn about all of this with you. We don't feel that we know it all. We feel like we know a lot. And we also feel like we have so many more questions. And we feel like we're going to find them by looking in communities outside of our own. Sean lives in Canada. I live in the US. The world is big and the world is small. So we're hoping that we can meet you guys and start to collaborate with you.
It is amazing how we've loosened the ties between us, right? Like we were talking the other day about people have worked for companies, multi-million-dollar deals, and have never seen the people that they've been working with. So yeah, interesting times. And then as well, just this is the catch-all. If you're doing something great and we think we're doing something great, can we somehow pair them together and make it great together? And so whether it's doing events or immersions or keynotes or roundtables or workshops, we have many different ideas in terms of how to compartmentalize what we do and make it work within your particular world. So we're very open ears, and just get in touch with us at futureproofingnext.com. And we have a range of different digital events. These are our most popular keynotes from last year, but obviously they'll change over time. But we tend to be in the sweet spot of what business audiences definitely want to hear from. And then particularly interesting, later in the year, we'll be doing activity cards. So Andrea mentioned 88 triggers and the 88 piano keys. I forgot 88 was actually the reason why I think we started that way, where it's like, wouldn't it be great if we could get the piano keys? And from a playing card, a real playing card set, we've also done the 52 business models of the future. And we're the only people in the world that have ranked the most interesting business models of the future. Nobody's done that. So we want to turn that into an activity card set. So Andrea, we've covered a lot of stuff. It's nearly St. Patrick's Day, so I may break into when Irish eyes are smiling, but I will hold back from having our audience do that. What's the message takeaway for this month? We've lived with our materials so long, and we are about to bring it out to the world in our Futureproofing U course. What's new that's dawned upon you that we're mining here?
To me, the biggest message that we got from our Futureproofing community came not from Sean and Andrea, but came from our community, because we asked them a couple of weeks ago, what are the two biggest things that you're dealing with in business and, post COVID? And there's this huge issue there. Somebody was talking about ag tech and, incredible hunger and poverty and social issues and sustainability. It seems some days as if the world is impossible to tackle. And yet, when we asked people what they thought were the most important things to look at right now as leaders, they talked about the speed of the market, which is clear. But the second thing was purpose. And I have been thinking about that for the last couple of weeks, because when people used to talk about purpose-driven organizations, it was almost a symbolic or a lip service. It was the thing to say. But we're starting to hear business leaders in pretty much every industry saying, if I'm in ag tech, I have to tackle the issue of food. And if I'm in water, I need to think about water quality and accessibility. And if I'm in manufacturing, I need to think about frugal and agile ways to look at our processes. So I think the world's changing. And I think the message takeaway is that there's a lot of us that really want to serve society as we serve capitalism. And I believe that the only way to do it is to approach it the way that we are, by co-creating, by listening, and by reaching out to other people like we've done today. So I'm very excited. Sean, what about you? What's your message takeaway, other than the incredible, when Irish eyes were smiling, that you're about to sing at the end of this, for the first time, that you're about to sing, because I did hear you say that.
Well, no, I guess on the serious note of your question, I'd like the fact that you've kind of chose purpose. I think purpose has certainly ride alongside of our car for a while in innovation. I think it's become a much more serious part. It's actually in the car now. And I think I've been raving to everybody about something that I saw on Netflix recently called The Most Unknown. And on a very, very similar basis, it was a documentary really well done of 9 scientists that, the indomitable spirit of exploration and humans, and how we're just so resilient and we so need to understand things, some things that we can barely even understand ourselves. And I think it's not just science. I think it's innovators here too. And so I think, I'd like to think that people that are looking at future-proofing, ourselves, people that collaborate with us, we're just not building something so somebody can sell more jelly beans. We are building something that hopefully can make a better world. So I'm glad we're colliding on the same point there. I think that's been my more recent message takeaway.
Well, we've been hearing some chat, by the way, too. I just want to acknowledge that. And at the end, if you want to do a little office hours, we're able to do that now. We've learned how to make it possible for people to talk. So at the end, we'll ask if anybody wants to stay for a couple minutes. But I did want to say that this has been one of the most interesting chats, because it's almost like there are two webinars going on at the same time, the one where we're talking and the one where we're learning. So speaking of learn, we have learned a lot about what's on people's minds, and really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't concur more. And in return for your good tidings, anybody that did decide to straddle into our room today, we'll certainly make these available to We have tumbled together the 300 most interesting stats about future proofing and the whole universe that is. We've lined them up according to our see, learn, decide, commit. And yeah, it's fascinating when you look beyond your own stuff. So some of them are definitely our own stats and our own research, but some of them are other stats. We have no proclivities not to use something from a Deloitte or McKinsey if it's really, really good. And so it's interesting to see this collection of massively interesting stats that you can roll out at any of your own events or at your management meetings and try to be the smartest person in the room, I suppose. Andrea, you always say it, catch up, don't give up, right? As a former marathoner that didn't have a wonderful marathon time, I used to say this for about 20 kilometers of the races that I was in, but it's amazing how people can catch up. We see it in companies time and time again. And here's where you can get in touch with us. The most direct place to get in touch with us, hello@futureproofingnext.com will get to us. We have a chock full of website full of interesting stuff.